Cuban authorities say they have uncovered a human trafficking ring which recruits its citizens to fight for Russia in Ukraine.
Russia has been accused of coercing people in Cuba to help fight in the war in Ukraine.
The network operates from Russia and targets Cubans who live there, and even some who live in Cuba.
A 25-year-old Russian soldier, Malik Diop, was captured by Ukrainian forces. At first, it seemed like a victory, but something seemed weird. During interrogation, they discovered he was neither Russian nor a soldier. He was just another victim of Russian deception. The deception of numbers and greed. Most people think only Russians and Ukrainians are fighting on the battlefield. But in reality, fighters from approximately 40 countries are fighting in this war. The only difference is some of them know they're going to fight a war, while others don't realize it until they're already on the battlefield. Now look, we're not sure how long this video is going to survive. Some will hate this brutal expose and try to bury it. Except you can fight back by hitting that like button. Thank you. Ukraine's intelligence has been tracking foreign fighters, and they discovered something surprising. They saw that people from a weird country are fighting for Russia. Well, it's weird because it's a small island nation thousands of miles away from Russia. Not one, but thousands of them are fighting for Russia. Ukraine exposed that thousands of Cubans have been recruited by Russia. It's organized, systematic, and one of the largest stories nobody's really talking about. According to US State Department documents from this year, Cuba has become the second largest source of foreign troops fighting for Russia, second only to North Korea. And that's pretty remarkable. Some reports say there could be between 1,000 and 5,000 Cubans fighting right now. Ukrainian intelligence suggests that the actual number might be considerably higher, possibly up to 20,000 people. Now remember, I said people, not soldiers. Some are tricked onto the battlefield. For others, it's a golden opportunity, because Russia has made playing with life and death incredibly lucrative. Imagine someone offers you $2,000 every month. That's more than 40 times the average Cuban income. For thousands of young men facing poverty, food insecurity, and limited prospects, that promise sounds irresistible. It's not greed, it's survival. Since the war began, Russia has suffered nearly 1 million casualties. Estimates suggest it's losing around 1,000 soldiers every day. So it makes sense why Russia has been recruiting from other countries. It's running out of men to fight. At least that's the lie the media has been feeding you. Russia's government budget is in serious trouble. In just the first 7 months of 2025, they've already spent $61 billion more than they planned to spend. That's 4 times over their original budget. Russia is in trouble. Oil and gas sales are dropping, they're not collecting enough taxes, and the war is costing them a fortune. One of the reasons Russia is hiring foreigners is Russia can't afford to raise the bonuses needed to attract its own citizens to fight. Instead, they're turning to others, like Cubans, who are willing to do it for far less. Because of this money crisis, they've started cutting what they offer. For example, in some areas, signing bonuses dropped from about $34,000 to just $9,000. Now that's clearly a huge cut. But even with these lower payments, Russia can't find enough Russians willing to fight. Instead, foreign soldiers like Cubans and North Koreans are being offered contracts instead. These soldiers are cheaper to hire. Russia doesn't have to pay them much, and it doesn't have to give them the same benefits as Russians. And most importantly, Russia doesn't face angry Russian families complaining about losing their sons. They can't sustain the war the old way anymore. So they're cutting corners wherever they can. This is a win-win for both sides. The economic reality is most Cuban recruits come from an island nation experiencing its worst economic crisis in decades. The average monthly salary in Cuba hovers between $16 and $48, depending on exchange rates used. That's the entire monthly income. What Russia offers them is nothing less than a miracle. This is thousands of dollars in income. Well, at least on paper. The Cuban government consistently denies any involvement in these recruiting efforts. They characterize the phenomenon as illegal human trafficking, perpetrated by criminal networks organizing without state sanction. They say they have nothing to do with it, and that they are actively fighting against it. Between 2023 and 2025, Cuban courts have prosecuted 9 criminal cases related to mercenary activity. These prosecutions resulted in 26 convictions, with prison sentences ranging from 5 to 14 years. On the surface, it appears Cuba is cracking down on recruiters. But something seems off. The scale and systemic nature of the recruitment made many observers question the official narrative. They say, how could such a large-scale operation happen without at least tacit government approval in Cuba's tightly controlled system? An operation moving thousands of people out of the country, coordinating travel, processing military contracts, and doing this all openly and systematically. In a country where the government monitors borders and controls movements, This would not happen without awareness from authorities. The numbers are too significant. The organization is too sophisticated. The continuous flow of recruits is too steady. For many experts and observers, it simply doesn't add up that a government as controlling as Cuba's would be completely unaware of thousands of its citizens leaving to fight in a foreign war. Whether through direct involvement or deliberate allowance, this operation could not function at this scale without government knowledge at some level. The system is brutal, yet a masterpiece of planning and precision. The pipeline moving thousands of Cubans from their homes to battlefields in Ukraine is not a formal military arrangement between two governments. It operates in a gray zone, using private citizens, social media, and a layer of legality. The structure is deliberate and gives both Russia and Cuba the ability to deny direct involvement while ensuring a steady flow of soldiers. The recruitment process begins online in Spanish-language social media groups. Facebook groups like Cubans in Moscow and the Russian social network VKontakte become platforms where advertisements appear offering lucrative work opportunities in Russia. These posts promise high salaries, signing bonuses, and Russian citizenship. The advertisements say deliberately vague things about the military nature of the work. Some mention construction, while others talk about reconstruction work. Very few clearly state that recruits will be fighting in a war. Cuban citizens can enter Russia as tourists without needing visas, which is a crucial advantage that makes the entire recruitment scheme feasible. Several key individuals manage this network from the ground. Yelena Smirnova, a 41-year-old Russian travel agent based in Ryazan. She posts jobs announcements and manages logistics across the network. Her lawyer claims she helped recruit more than 3,000 foreigners. Another woman, Olga Shiryaeva, works as a hairdresser. She partners with Smirnova on recruitment efforts. Diana Diaz is a 37-year-old Cuban woman living in Russia, whose phone number appears in recruitment advertisements. Elena Shuvalova was another prominent recruiter who actively posted advertisements starting in mid-2023, promoting one-year military contracts offering salaries of 204,000 rubles, approximately $2,086, along with promises of Russian citizenship. Diana Diaz ran a soap flower business in Ryazan while helping with recruitment logistics, including paperwork, ticket purchasing, and posting announcements. Once someone falls for it, the real trap begins. The operational model creates a debt trap. Smirnova and her associates pay for a recruit's plane ticket from Havana to Moscow, and they cover initial accommodation costs. The recruit does not pay up front. However, these costs are deducted from the recruit's first military paycheck, creating immediate financial dependency on the recruiters and the military system. Once someone responds to an advertisement, the network facilitators help with paperwork and travel arrangements. Recruits typically board Aeroflot airline flights from Varadero Airport in Cuba to Moscow, often traveling in groups of 40 or more. Upon arriving in Moscow, recruits are met by network members and transported to military enlistment offices. Many end up in the city of Ryazan, home to a major military academy that has been identified as the central processing hub for foreign fighters. Records show that Smirnova and Shiryaeva were seen at the Ryazan recruitment center processing 30 to 40 people daily. At the enlistment centers, recruits are pressured to sign one-year contracts written entirely in Russian, a language they can't read. Their passports are confiscated at this point, trapping them in the system. The fact that recruits are funneled through a major military city like Ryazan suggests a formalized and integrated system with direct coordination with the Russian Ministry of Defense, contradicting any narrative of a rogue, decentralized operation. Some Cubans were aware that they were going to fight a war, but others realized it once they got to the battlefield. Frank Dario Yarase Manfugas was a 35-year-old Cuban musician and mathematics teacher who saw a Facebook advertisement promising construction work in Russia. He came out of need, believing that going to another country to work would help his family move forward. Instead, he ended up on the front lines in Ukraine within weeks. Recruits were initially told they would work in construction, rebuilding war-damaged infrastructure, or serve in support roles behind the lines. Instead, they received minimal military training, often just 2 weeks, before being issued helmets, military equipment, and weapons. They started to rebel because they had never had military training and did not know how to use weapons. When recruits refused, they were beaten. Even Africans from multiple countries are being deceived in the exact same way, promised factory jobs, only to end up fighting a war they never willingly signed up for. In June of 2025, The Telegraph uncovered something truly disturbing happening in Russia. Recruiters were targeting desperate people across Africa with fake job promises. Jean Onana is a 36-year-old father of 3 from Cameroon. Like many people, he was unemployed and struggling to feed his family. Then someone offered him a job at a shampoo factory in Moscow. The pay seemed good, so Jean sold everything he owned just to buy a plane ticket. But when he landed in Moscow in March of 2025, there was no shampoo factory waiting for him. Instead, he was immediately detained. And he wasn't alone. Men from Bangladesh, Ghana, and Zimbabwe were trapped there too. They were all told the same thing: sign a military contract or else. After just 5 weeks of basic training in Rostov and Luhansk, Gene found himself inside a frontline bunker in Ukraine. His unit had 8 people from Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, and Brazil. An artillery strike hit them. 7 died instantly. Gene survived by hiding in the rubble for 6 days with his injuries, until Ukrainian forces finally found him. Similarly, Malik Diop, a 25-year-old from Senegal, was walking through a Russian shopping mall when recruiters approached him. They offered him a kitchen job in Luhansk, paying $5,700 a month. Sounds pretty great, right? Within 1 week, Malik was handed a rifle and sent to fight near Toretsk. He saw corpses in forests and mutilated bodies inside of homes. He couldn't take it anymore, so he deserted and was eventually captured by Ukrainian forces. And here's the scary part. This isn't just happening to a few people. Social media in Cameroon is flooded with posts of families searching for missing men who traveled to Russia and then simply vanished. One account has documented at least 67 Cameroonians who were killed. These recruitment networks stretch across multiple countries. In Kenya, investigators discovered organized schemes running medical checks in Nairobi, then flying people to Russia through Turkey on tourist visas. Once they arrived in St. Petersburg, their passports were taken away, biometric data was collected, and they were handed contracts written entirely in Russian, enlisting them into military service. And it's not just men being deceived. African women have been tricked into working at drone production facilities at the Alabuzha Special Economic Zone in Yelabuzha, east of Moscow. They had no idea they'd be working at military facilities. These people were promised jobs in shampoo factories and kitchens. Instead, they were sent to war. Sounds harsh, but most of these people are ready to face it, and for a different reason. Cuba in 2024 and 2025 is experiencing a severe economic crisis, with triple-digit inflation in informal markets, widespread food insecurity, and collapsing purchasing power. A 2024 survey found that 61% of Cuban respondents struggle to buy necessary means to survive. The Russian military contract offers $2,000 monthly. Contracts include one-time enlistment bonuses of 195,000 rubles, roughly $2,000, and 2 million rubles, approximately $21,000, for families if the recruit is killed. Some are promised that completing the contract would lead to Russian citizenship for themselves and their families. However, many recruits never received the promised payments. Expelled Cuban soldiers revealed that recruiters withheld initial salaries, claiming they needed to recover recruitment and travel expenses. Some Cubans were expelled from the Russian army in January of 2024 without full payment, without Russian passports, and without legal documentation, leaving them homeless and at risk of deportation. The actual number of Cubans recruited varies by source. Ukrainian intelligence compiled detailed databases tracking foreign fighters. The I Want to Live project, a Ukrainian government initiative encouraging enemy combatants to surrender, published a list of 1,028 verified Cuban mercenaries with confirmed names and personal details who signed contracts between 2023 and 2024. Even using the most conservative estimates, Cuba ranks as one of Russia's largest foreign troop contributors, second only to North Korea, and potentially poised to overtake it. Russia has faced more than 1.1 million casualties, according to Ukrainian estimates, and systematically recruited fighters from numerous countries to avoid politically damaging domestic mobilization campaigns. Nepal provided an estimated 15,000 recruits, with at least 40 confirmed as of September of 2024. Sri Lanka has 64 identified recruits. One investigation identified over 1,500 foreign mercenaries from 48 countries, processed through Moscow's recruitment center between April of 2023 and May of 2024. However, Cuba's recruitment stands out, because many Cuban recruits benefit from Cuba's mandatory 2-year military service, providing them with basic combat experience. Cuban recruits arrived at combat zones within weeks of landing in Russia with minimal training. Many were assigned to the 106th Airborne Division, an elite paratrooper unit heavily involved in intense fighting, including the brutal battle for Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. Being assigned to this unit meant Cuban fighters went directly to frontline positions. The survival statistics are horrifying. Ukrainian intelligence data indicates that foreign combatants experience mortality within 140 to 150 days of their engagement on average. This means the average life expectancy for a Cuban fighter on the front line is about 5 months. Andriy Yusov, a spokesperson for Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, explained that it is beneficial for Putin's regime to attract Cuban mercenaries, because if a foreigner dies, There are no social payouts and no responsibility. And fewer Russians die. Ukrainian officials compiled a list of 39 Cubans confirmed killed. However, Andrei Yusov noted that officials believe the actual death toll to be much higher. Estimates suggest between 200 and 300 Cubans have been killed, though the true number is likely higher as many are marked as missing in action. Ukrainian forces have captured multiple Cuban fighters. As of September of 2025, Ukraine had 3 Cuban prisoners of war. Captured fighters have reported that neither Havana nor Moscow wants to take them or answer for them, leaving prisoners in a limbo status, with neither government claiming responsibility for their welfare or seeking their repatriation. In early 2024, a group of Cuban recruits was expelled from the Russian army without clear reasons. Without proper documentation, unpaid wages, or legal status, they became homeless in Russia. A Cuban named Yuan explained in an April 2024 WhatsApp message that Russians demanded they pay more money and go back to war even though they did not receive full salary and were not given Russian passports. These expelled soldiers faced constant risk of deportation and imprisonment if they refused to serve in combat. Elena Smirnova, one of the primary recruiters, was prosecuted in Russia for allegedly stealing salaries from over 300 Cuban soldiers. Many recruits never received the initial enlistment bonuses or monthly salaries promised to them. But what Russia hides is a bigger problem that could turn into a catastrophe very soon. Russia already has one of the world's most extreme gender imbalances even before this war started. As of 2024, women outnumber men by approximately 10.3 to 10.4 million people. Now think about that for a second. The female population stands at around 77.2 to 78.8 million, while men number only 66.8 to 68.4 million. That means women make up about 54% of Russia's population, and men just 46%. To put this into perspective, Russia has approximately 863 to 865 males for every 1,000 females. The global average? 1,016 males per 1,000 females. Russia is way below that. Worldwide, about 105 boys are born for every 100 girls. But in Russia, women start outnumbering men at around the age of 30. Compare that to Japan, where this crossover doesn't happen until age 56. Why is this happening? Well, Russia has the largest life expectancy gender gap in the entire world. In 2022, Russian women outlived men by approximately 10 to 11 years. Working-age men are 6 times more likely to die from external causes like accidents and suicide compared to women. The reason? Excessive alcohol consumption, poor lifestyle choices, and inadequate healthcare access, especially after Putin's healthcare optimization program. And now, the war has made everything dramatically worse. Since February of 2022, more than 120,000 to 250,000 Russian men have been killed. The gender imbalance that was already extreme has become even more pronounced. In areas directly affected by the conflict, the situation is devastating. Widowhood rates can reach as high as 80%. That means women are left alone with the sole responsibility of supporting their children and their elderly dependents. Russia isn't just losing soldiers, it's losing an entire generation of men. And this is also the reason that Russia was forced to recruit from foreign countries. Families back in Cuba are left with an information black hole. They receive no official updates from either the Russian or Cuban governments. One family told CBS News their relative had been missing since November of 2024, and they had never received any of the promised money. With no official death toll and no bodies returning home, the true human cost remains hidden from the Cuban public. Ukrainian intelligence has documented that at least 250 Cuban fighters remained on the front lines even after their one-year contracts expired. What began as a supposed voluntary contract for economic opportunity has transformed into forced labor in armed conflict. Cuba's foreign ministry first publicly acknowledged the recruitment issue on September 4th of 2023. The government stated that Cuba is not part of the war in Ukraine, and claimed authorities had detected a human trafficking network operating from Russia to incorporate Cuban citizens into its military forces. The government emphasizes its firm and clear historical position against mercenaryism and said it was working to neutralize and dismantle recruitment networks. The Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a categorical rejection of U.S. accusations in October of 2025, insisting that Cuba was not part of the armed conflict and maintains a zero-tolerance policy towards mercenaryism. This official narrative contains a stark contradiction. On September 14, 2023, Cuba's ambassador to Russia, Julio Antonio Garmendia Peña, told Russian state news agency RIA Novosti something very different. He stated that Cuba has nothing against Cubans who just want to sign a contract and legally take part in the operation within the Russian army. He opposed only illegality and operations outside the legal area. This statement suggested Cuba would not prevent its citizens from voluntarily enlisting in Russia's military, directly contradicting the government's public opposition to mercenary activity. When asked to clarify whether Russian recruitment of Cubans constituted illegal mercenary activity, Ambassador Peña declined to provide a clear answer. The Foreign Ministry later issued a statement to rectify the ambassador's remarks. The initial comment revealed a permissive attitude. The October 2025 Foreign Ministry statement declared that Cuban authorities do not have precise information about Cuban nationals participating in the military forces of either side of the war. Officials insisted that none of them have the encouragement, commitment, or consent of the Cuban state. Cuban Vice Foreign Minister Carlos Fernández de Cosio stated in June of 2025 that Havana made public and denounced the recruitment phenomenon and had taken actions by speaking with related governments. He emphasized that Cuban laws prohibit citizens from participating in the wars of other countries, and that this is punished by law in Cuba. However, this statement raised questions about enforcement, given the scale of recruitment. Cuba characterized U.S. allegations as part of a political campaign designed to undermine Cuba ahead of the annual United Nations General Assembly vote on the U.S. embargo. The timing of U.S. allegations just before the UN vote lent credibility to Cuba's claim that Washington was using the recruitment issue for diplomatic leverage. Despite Cuba's denials, international observers have expressed significant skepticism about the government's claimed ignorance and non-involvement. Ukrainian intelligence official Andrei Yusov stated bluntly that, taking into account the totalitarian nature of Cuba, such recruitment could not have taken place without the blessing of the Cuban regime. And evidence has emerged suggesting possible official complicity. Initial investigations into the recruitment network implicated a Russian major and Colonel Milon Gomez, the military attaché of the Cuban embassy in Moscow, in the enlistment of nearly 189 Cuban citizens, directly linking an official state representative to the scheme. Ukrainian intelligence and U.S. lawmakers have pointed to the systemic nature of recruitment, the use of official airports for departures, and the apparent ease with which recruiters operated as indicators that Cuban authorities were at minimum turning a blind eye. During his May 2024 visit to the Kremlin, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel stood beside Vladimir Putin and stated that Cuba wished success in carrying out the special military operation. This is not the language of a neutral party, but of a committed ally. Cuba's ambiguous position may reflect complex strategic calculations. The recruitment provides several benefits to the Cuban government without requiring direct involvement. It offers an economic pressure valve for desperate citizens, reducing potential internal unrest from unemployment and poverty. Remittances sent back home by recruits provide hard currency to families, and ultimately to the Cuban economy. Maintaining plausible deniability allows Cuba to preserve its relationship with Russia while avoiding direct international condemnation. In October of 2025, Russia's Federation Council ratified a military cooperation agreement with Cuba, originally signed in March of 2025. This agreement establishes a legal framework for joint military operations, training, intelligence sharing, and potential military-based deployments. Russian officials have suggested the agreement could eventually facilitate deployment of advanced weapon systems to Cuba, including Iskander operational tactical missile systems and the Oreshnik medium-range ballistic missile system. This deepening Russia-Cuba military relationship has occurred parallel to the recruitment controversy, suggesting that whatever Cuba's official position is, the practical effect has been closer alignment with Moscow's strategic interests. The United States has been direct in its condemnation of both Cuba and Russia. A U.S. State Department spokesperson accused the Cuban government of having failed to protect its citizens from being used as pawns in the Russia-Ukraine war. In October of 2025, the Trump administration circulated an internal State Department cable to dozens of U.S. diplomatic missions, directing diplomats to use Cuba's role as a major troop contributor as an argument against a UN resolution calling for lifting the U.S. embargo on Cuba. However, the diplomatic campaign had limited success. The October 2024 UN vote resulted in 187 countries voting in favor of ending the embargo, with only the United States and Israel opposed. This was virtually identical to previous year's results. In contrast to Washington's clear position, the reaction from Latin America has been largely muted and divided. President Gabriel Boric of Chile was a consistent critic of Russia's invasion. Argentina, under President Javier Milei, aligned more closely with the West. However, Brazil, under President Luiz Inácio Lula, and Colombia, under President Gustavo Petro, adopted a stance of neutrality, often calling for peace talks. Cuba's traditional allies, in particular Venezuela and Nicaragua, stood firmly by Russia. Most regional governments maintain diplomatic relations with both Cuba and Russia and have avoided taking positions on the recruitment issue. The Organization of American States has not formally addressed Cuban involvement in Ukraine. Cuba vigorously defended itself against U.S. allegations while deepening ties with Russia. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez consistently framed U.S. accusations as politically motivated attacks designed to justify the embargo. At the UN General Assembly, he described the U.S. embargo as commercial warfare, causing $4.8 billion in economic damage in 2023 alone. Russia expanded economic support for Cuba. In June of 2025, the Russian energy minister met with Cuban officials to discuss energy cooperation until 2050. Russia committed to modernizing Cuba's energy infrastructure and pledged to supply Cuba with 1.64 million tons of oil and petroleum products annually. The Russian government stated it would direct Russian corporations to invest $1 billion in Cuba between 2025 and 2030. Cuba became a BRICS partner country in January of 2025 and joined the BRICS New Development Bank in July of 2025. The Cuban president described this as a great hope for the countries of the South and a step towards more just and equitable international order. NDB memberships offers Cuba new sources of credit for strategic sectors. European nations and NATO took note of Cuban involvement but did not make it a major diplomatic priority. NATO claimed in October of 2024 that it had evidence North Korean soldiers had been sent to Russia, representing a significant escalation. By contrast, Cuban involvement, while numerically substantial, was characterized as recruitment of individuals rather than state deployment of military units. North Korea deployed approximately 12,000 troops to Russia, primarily to the Kursk region. Unlike Cuban mercenaries recruited through deceptive schemes, North Korean soldiers represent official state military units sent under terms of a formal treaty. North Korean troops received Russian uniforms, weapons, and training, and operated as integrated units under Russian command. The deployment modalities differ significantly. North Korean troops are state-sanctioned and deployed as military units, while Cuban fighters are recruited as individuals through networks Cuba officially disavows. However, both deployments serve similar purposes for Russia, reducing Russian casualties, providing fresh manpower, and cementing partnerships with authoritarian allies. The Cuban recruitment phenomenon demonstrates an emergence of a coalition of autocracies supporting Russia's war effort. It reveals how economic desperation in sanctioned states creates vulnerability to exploitation. This phenomenon shows Russia's adaptation to avoiding politically costly domestic mobilization by recruiting foreign fighters from low-income countries while sustaining its military campaign. The deepening Russia-Cuba partnership represents a revival of Cold War-era alignments in a new multipolar context. Cuba's integration into BRICS, its military cooperation with Russia, and its resistance to US-dominated financial architecture signals a deliberate strategy of alignment with rising powers against Western hegemony. For Russia, foreign soldiers absorb casualties without domestic political cost. When a Cuban dies, there are no angry families or social payouts to manage. For Cuba, recruitment reduces internal pressure and deepens ties with Russia, a crucial economic ally. And the Cuban people pay the price. Mothers lose their sons. Families receive no information about missing relatives. Young men sign contracts they cannot read and are trapped fighting. This shows how authoritarian regimes exploit economic desperation and use vulnerable populations as expendable resources. The Ukrainian war extends far beyond Eastern Europe. Cuban fighters in the Donbass are trafficking victims, wrapped in military contracts. Their presence reminds us that modern conflicts have global consequences, and the most vulnerable always bear the heaviest burden. This recruitment phenomenon reveals something deeply disturbing. It's not just about military contracts or political conflict. It's about the intersection of economic desperation, geopolitical alignment, and human trafficking, all happening at the same time. Thanks for watching.